3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nick.
And I'm Yuri. Thanks for joining us again.
This week, we are going to be discussing a topic that I'm sure many of you heard of, and it involves Bitmex, and it involves some regulators. Let me begin by reading an excerpt from Forbes. Arthur Hayes, 34, Ben Dello, 36, and Samuel Reed, 31, as well as first employee Gregory Dwyer, 37, have been charged with violating the Bank Secrecy Act and conspiracy to violate the Act by willfully failing to establish, implement, and maintain adequate anti-money laundering program. According to the statement by the United States Office of the Southern District of New York, Reed has been arrested, while Hayes, Dilo, and Dwyer remain at large. Each charge carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. As a result, we saw Bitcoin come down a little bit. It might continue ongoing. We don't know. It all depends on whether or not withdrawals are going to be happening smoothly for the next little while. So we will keep monitoring that. Outside of the impact on the market, this, for me personally, presents a paradigm shift in general. I really believe that this is the end of non-KYC AML exchanges, period. This is a maturation, if you will, of the Bitcoin ecosystem, for better or for worse, and it's a transition to a highly tightened regulatory framework similar to that of most financial instruments and products that currently exist. So because it has been going in this direction, I personally believe that it has been justified, although I do believe very much in the past it already has been justified by various government agencies. But this really puts it into the final realm of, yes, very much Bitcoin is a real financial instrument and it needs to be regulated as such. What we had in the past were exchanges, starting with Mt. Gox, that required just an email to join, basically. And this proliferated for quite some time. Yes, KYC AML started to come into the scene with other bigger exchanges over time, such as Bitstamp, Bitfinex, and many of the other ones. But most of the exchanges that didn't involve any fiat, so meaning any US dollars, even though they might use virtual US dollars, Tether stablecoins in that regard, most of the exchanges did require KYC AML. The ones that didn't, again, mainly transferred one type of digital asset to another. So therefore, they believed that they would be okay from the regulation standpoint, since none of these things were considered currency or assets or financial instruments of any kind. And this news essentially has changed that, and it has completely labeled any type of digital asset, whatever it may be, as legal financial instruments. Therefore, they need to be regulated. And this paradigm shift, I believe, is just the start, because they have now set a precedent. Of course, once the case continues in court, that precedent will be validified. But this precedent essentially says that now any single exchange, application, Uniswap, for example, which is really popular right now, I don't know why, but it is, and any other quasi-exchanges, I guess you could say, that are exchanging one token of a digital asset for another, now come under the regulatory guise of the United States, as well as I'm sure other nations as well. So this is going to spread, in my opinion, to more and more exchanges, because really there are many others which could fall under this category. And all the US has to do is just put pressure on them. So in my opinion, this is the deciding time, if you are an exchange, to see whether you're going to last for the next 10 years. And the only way seemingly to last through those 10 years looks like regulation.
Yeah, well, I think what we're discussing here is more of a descriptive, of course, than prescriptive. And this doesn't mean that we generally endorse the overregulation that comes to Bitcoin, because of course these KYC and AML rules are said to combat things like money laundering and terrorist financing, but in practical terms it always hinders the end user, the individual who deals with Bitcoin. And even in terms of regular banking, they also have the same things, KYC and AML. I guess people are used to, providing personal information when they go and open a bank account, but when they start a Bitcoin exchange account, before it wasn't the case. And like you said, gradually, then suddenly everybody started requiring KYC ML. And a lot of the time, it kind of makes it feel like this law and these regulations are designed to make you feel like a criminal by default. Essentially, just the fact that you are buying Bitcoin already makes you a suspicious person, or because we have to understand the nature of Bitcoin is such that it goes completely against everything that central banking stands for. So obviously they do want to regulate all such exchanges. They all want to regulate and foresee and oversee all money transfers on the Bitcoin network and similar. So this has been coming. It is coming, and I think they will regulate as much as possible. They will impose all kinds of rules. I think they will actually over-regulate. They will impose more draconian measures on Bitcoin exchanges and brokers and whatnot, because of the simple fact that Bitcoin is not under their jurisdiction and under anybody else's jurisdiction. That doesn't mean that we agree with that. However, obviously for our business purposes, we operate a brokerage firm. We have to abide by the rules. We have to comply with all the regulations, because our job is to provide a venue for individuals to acquire Bitcoin, to accumulate Bitcoin, or to sell Bitcoin. And if the regulations say we have to collect personal information, then that's what we have to do. But at the same time, you mentioned that all exchanges will implement these rules very, very soon, even those that don't yet. I completely agree with that in terms of talking about centralized exchanges. However, there is a trend going on right now, and it's more of a technological trend, which is essentially about creating a network, or so to speak, a decentralized exchange services for Bitcoin, in which people trade Bitcoin with each other in a peer-to-peer fashion. So, and that does not only include small transactions, because right now you can go to some peer-to-peer exchange like Hodl Hodl, and you can buy a few $1,000s worth of Bitcoin without KYC, because you're buying directly from a person that sells to you, right? So that person is not a officially a registered dealer, a registered exchange. They simply sell to you personally, and you have no idea of knowing whether that person engages in the selling process as a business practice, or they just do a one-time sell of their Bitcoin because they just decided to, sell some or take some profit. But at the same time, there will be more and more such services for larger amounts too. And high net worth individuals don't always have to go to an exchange to buy. Right now, they go to, for example, brokerage firms, but they will also be able to buy on decentralized markets pretty soon, I think, without KYC as well, because those markets will be a lot more difficult to regulate for the reason that they are not hosted on any centralized platform. They are not hosted on any centralized domain name. So it's not a single exchange. It's more of a protocol rather than an actual exchange. So any user, just like with Bitcoin, you can run your own full node. With such exchanges, you'll be able to run your own piece of software and connect to the network in which all other people trade. Right now, of course, these technologies are still in their infancy, and a lot of them, while seem to be peer-to-peer, are still centralized, can be and appear centralized on certain domain names. But I think what we talked about before in the previous episodes, the emergence of this parallel unregulated economy will be fueled by these actions by the CFTC and the Department of Justice and any other agencies in other countries that decide to pursue and impose draconian measures on Bitcoin exchangers and brokers, because these brokers, a lot of them will have to comply to stay in business and probably suffer a bit of a loss in terms of customer base. Um, However, some of them will refuse to comply. They would rather go out of business, and those people still having this entrepreneurial spirit and still wanting to engage in business, they will go the route of decentralized exchanges. They will go the route of the unregulated market. And I'm not talking here about, black market, although it can be considered such if if let's say all the governments just decide next day that okay, the coins that are the bitcoins that are bought on KYC and regulated exchanges are now considered legal and all the others are illegal, then yeah, suddenly everybody who finds themselves on the other side of the deal are essentially black market entrepreneurs and illicit traders, right? Um, but I don't think it will happen like this overnight. I think it will be just, kind of the two economies will be coexisting. The, what does it mean in general? I think for us and for people in general, it means that they will still kind of have a choice whether they want to do things officially or unofficially or semi-officially, and the main argument from my side is that Bitcoin still, even with these measures, cannot be regulated because it will always find a technological solution to a political problem. And Bitcoin itself is a technological solution to a political problem, the problem of central banking. Obviously, the somewhere over 100 years ago, people, some governments took a wrong turn, and now we are in this situation. And Bitcoin solves that without any centralized committees. It's just software that runs on people's computers, and I think it will keep running on people's computers, whether the Department of Justice or any other agency wants it or not. That's my hope, because if we speak about a fully KYC Bitcoin economy, I think that already becomes not a Bitcoin economy. That essentially means that Bitcoin is dead.
Yeah, very, very well said. And it very much is a cat and mouse game, I believe, in terms of the technological innovation versus the regulators coming in to try to control how the evolution of the ecosystem goes. I think the danger that I see in this predominantly is one that we're seeing right now actually with cash. So akin it this way, there are a lot of ways and communities which can utilize cash, which are very difficult for governments to monitor currently. And this provides the ability to transact both in a black market and in a gray market and in what is for now a white market, which is basically people selling goods, Craigslist, to one another. However, as we see the government moving in the direction of digital cash, soon cash itself might be deemed as only usable in these gray and black markets because of the regulation that is coming in and because of the pressures from the government entities to utilize digital cash versus cash itself. And this is their solution because they cannot regulate the cash transactions immediately, again, because of, let's just say, the technological innovation, if you will, of being able to just pass it person to person. They are trying to instill a new system instead, which of course is going to be, more user-friendly. It's going to be more amicable to the average individual to use, and so on and so forth. Then it's probably going to be the only way to receive UBI and things of that nature, which might happen in various areas of the world. But they will be putting forward this solution as a means to minimize the transactions in that economy and eventually make those cash-based economies, well, illegal and only deemed for illegal things. And people who are afraid of doing anything outside of the law, however egregious or onerous the law might be. Law-abiding citizens will strive not to participate in those communities as much as possible. This is kind of the similar situation that I see as a possibility for Bitcoin as well. Yes, Bitcoin can innovate very much with peer-to-peer exchanges, with decentralized exchanges where KYC ML is not required. But governments can still come in and put in these similar structures as well as requirements on various companies inside the ecosystem, as well as just on a regulatory standpoint countrywide, that prevents most people who are, again, want to naturally be law-abiding citizens to participate in this economy, because they will be forced to either go through KYC AML or, again, through these back channels, as they will be called. When in reality, it's not a back channel. It's the way that things used to be. It's free commerce, right? It's kind of the natural evolution, in my opinion, for Bitcoin, and the reason, as you say, why it was created. So you're going to get the same issues where you're going to have companies come in and go, well, wait a second, yes, we need to continue to operate, but we have to follow all these regulatory infrastructures, and there comes with that a substantial cost, comes with that substantial time investment, and of course liability, if you were to make an error in some of these submissions. Or they would be faced with, again, like you said, closing down and or perhaps going into a decentralized model. But with a decentralized model, continuing the press from the government side, it's going to be very difficult to create a consumer base that will be okay with utilizing these ecosystems. Because I'm thinking of this from my own personal perspective. Okay, say I do want to convert a portion of wealth, and in order to preserve my wealth, into Bitcoin. I don't want to share any KYC ML with an exchange. I go onto a peer-to-peer decentralized platform and I conduct my transfer. That's only half my problem. The other half of my problem is, okay, now if I want to utilize these funds that are in Bitcoin, what can I do? If the regulators are continuing to push and stifle the decentralized and free aspect of Bitcoin, I'm going to have less and less places to spend Bitcoin, right? I'm only going to be relegated to, if you will, these dark markets or these gray markets that allow me to purchase goods and services to survive. Otherwise, I'm faced with the other option of, okay, well, now I have to sell some of this Bitcoin into fiat in order to utilize it. There I met with another problem, tax compliance. How do I put in something into my ecosystem of finance that technically was never there to begin with? It just appeared, right? So you start to deal with all of these kind of issues, and it compounds to something along the lines of, it's too hard to not comply. And that sounds weird, but if you look at it again from an individual business perspective, from a consumer and client perspective, from a personal perspective, you see that just trying to do things by the book, even though it's actually way more complicated in reality, feels like the easier thing to do. And I think that's where the government is going, and I think that's really why this news from Bitmex is the paradigm shift. It's the government going, okay, you know what, we're getting real about this, and we're starting to push forward on whatever avenues we have of control in order to be able to really bring the ecosystem to this next level. And the next level, it might not necessarily be a good one. What I envision, I hope this is not the case, but it kind of is leaning in that direction, is this bifurcated Bitcoin economy, not just a dual economy between fiat and Bitcoin, but now you have fiat, regulated Bitcoin, and unregulated Bitcoin. Back in the day, this was the issue of colored coins, for example, if anybody knows much about that, but it is the labeling of the transactions, whether it is legitimate or illegitimate from a particular source, and tracking that through. This has huge implications, in my opinion, because Yuri, exactly just like you said, with flick of a switch, you can make a swath of Bitcoins completely illegal in a particular area simply because they've passed through these various channels. And that's a dangerous thing. I believe it's a slippery slope, very similar to how things have been going in the ecosystem with the pandemic, if you will. There's lots of other terms I'd love to use, but YouTube will prevent me from doing so. And that is one of tightening regulatory infrastructure or control infrastructure based on an assumption that is inherently not as dangerous to the public as it purports it to be. So take the same paradigm, think of it in Bitcoin. money laundering, illegal funding of terrorist activity. That's what Bitcoin is used for. Not really. Cash is actually the biggest thing for that, and the big banks, HSBC, and none of those have get caught multiple times helping in aiding and abetting of those particular transactions. But the point being is that the government says, hey, this is what it's being used for, and we're trying to eliminate this. And in doing so, they stifle the other side of it. And that's just an excuse, very similar with the pandemic and the lockdowns. The efficacy of these threats are nowhere near the reality of the impacts that they have on the people around them. And so this slippery slope might continue to slide. And I'm afraid of where it will go. Let's hope that we can continue to technologically out-innovate the government. But Yuri, at what point is technological innovation? At what point is a cash-based type of system, while legitimate in its own right and a solution to prevent people to enforce their own beliefs, the government beliefs on the transactions? How far does this go before you can't technologically innovate yourself out of this?
Well, I think you underestimate one property of Bitcoin, which is the so-called number go up technology of Bitcoin. This technology essentially makes Bitcoin appreciate in value perpetually due to its very, very simple economic design. The monetary base of Bitcoin is extremely limited. Obviously, it's 21 million Bitcoins, and you cannot create more. But the demand will, as we at least predict, keep going up. So if the demand keeps going up, the price will keep going up essentially indefinitely. And this plays on the very, very basic, behavioral kind of a feature of most people, which is greed. And a lot of the people, and when Bitcoin goes up, not just by $100, but when it goes up twice, 3 times, a 10x as it has done before, people's brains just shut off. They just want this thing. And suddenly they forget about all the regulations. They forget about everything that's out there. And what they think about is, how can I get my hands on this thing, right? And because this huge demand will be created for Bitcoin from people who want to get their hands on it as soon as possible, there will be these technological and entrepreneurial efforts from around the world which will solve this problem somehow. I don't know how it will be solved, but probably it will be a mix of compliant exchanges with non-compliant exchanges, with decentralized exchanges, with some entry and exit nodes that everybody charges their own little commission to keep this machine running. And there will always be a way to enter and exit the economy in a way that is essentially under the radar of the state. But at the same time, I think what we also underestimate is the desire of people to actually work for something that appreciates in value all the time. The desire to people to work and be paid in either gold or in Bitcoin in our case. Before it was gold because that was the gold standard, right? So, if I know, okay, well, I can ignore it maybe a couple of times, but if I can see that it's been pumping several times already, it went from $0 to $10, from $10 to $100, from 100 to 1,000, from 1,000 to 10,000, where it is right now, and then maybe it will go from 10,000 to 100,000. Maybe I will start thinking to myself, well, you know what? I definitely know that fiat is going down now, and I even have to pay, money to the bank for the sole privilege of storing my fiat there with the negative interest rates. But Bitcoin, on the other hand, has been going up all this time, and I've been ignoring it. I think right now it's time for me to start working and getting my wages in Bitcoin, right? So people will start demanding either wages in Bitcoin, or they will start, offering gigs and kind of side gigs and some kind of entrepreneurial things and efforts, starting enterprises and earning and demanding payment in Bitcoin. And the proverbial circular economy will actually be helped by it, because suddenly you see a web designer requesting that you pay him in Bitcoin, and then you, who is you want to start I don't know, like a garbage collection business, you need a website from the web designer, right? And then suddenly you're a garbage collection business, and you're like, well, why don't I request Bitcoin from the residents from whom I collect garbage, right? And then those residents will be, well, this guy is asking me for Bitcoin, that guy is asking me for Bitcoin, and I also see Bitcoin is going up. So why don't I just request the Bitcoin as a payment from my employer, right? And these things keep growing and growing, because I think greed is a great. Satoshi was a genius in this regard, that he I think foresaw that greed would drive Bitcoin quite well. And yes, we can discuss all kinds of merits that Bitcoin has, all kinds of benefits for, it's not controlled by governments, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of people care about number go up, and that's the reality of things, and that's how most people actually came into Bitcoin. Yes, as the saying goes, sometimes I came here for the Lambo, but stayed for the sound money. You know, so what it means is that a lot of people came for the gains that Bitcoin provides long term, but as they were curious to study what it is that they actually hold, and they, dove into this rabbit hole of information about what money is, how it works, where central banking came from, and how money in general has been essentially destroyed and faked throughout centuries. I think they become converts in the Bitcoin religion that we have right now, and that's what I want to see. So that's why I'm a little more optimistic about the future. It's definitely, it's definitely looking quite dystopian right now, where it's going. But I think without Bitcoin, it would be a lot worse. So at least Bitcoin is giving us this kind of hope. It's the light at the end of the tunnel, and I actually encourage people to work on technological advancements of Bitcoin, to create technology that can be that cannot be regulated. So instead of don't be evil, you can't be evil, things like that, right? Instead of uh, can you be regulated? Impossible to be regulated. Just like what the early cypherpunks did. They released cryptographic software for free out there, and the government tried to fight it, but at the end of the day, you cannot fight math. And Bitcoin is purely that. It's math. It's a piece of code. You cannot ban it. You cannot regulate it. You can print this piece of code on a piece of paper. It's literally several pages, and that's it. You can run it anywhere you want, as long as one node in the world runs, Bitcoin runs, and no one can stop it, right? So that's why I'm a little more optimistic. But obviously, we have to be wary. We have to see what's going on. We have to, we just have to keep our eyes open, and maybe not accept everything blindly. I hope some companies will be fighting the decisions that are made by these companies. As Bitmex, for whatever for what it's worth, and with whatever its misgivings are, is still a beast of the free market, right? It's it was a it was a pioneer in its industry. They pioneered a completely new business model, and they created this purely Bitcoin based futures contracts, and they made a lot of money from it, right? Obviously, I'm sure there was temptation to screw with the markets a little bit here and there, and do all kinds of things, and make even more money on that. Sure, yes, but you can't take away the innovative spirit that they have.
Yeah, very, very well said. I would warrant to say that maybe some of that manipulation was actually part and parcel of their business model, but that's neither here nor there, and perhaps for another discussion. I think to summarize everything that we've been talking about, one of the ways to look at it is really necessity versus regulation, whether it be Bitcoin, whether it be cash, whether it be food, whatever a case might be. I think that what you're looking at here is something very similar to a situation of a possible dystopian future where you have to have an immunology passport in order to travel, in order to get your basic services in terms of food and everything else. And those individuals who would feel that that is perhaps a threat to their liberty would not engage in attaining this type of pass. And as a result, they would have to resort by necessity to other means of transacting with their local grocer, with their local farmer, with whatever agencies that they need in order to conduct their life and those services, right? And that fight is strong. If you look at Venezuela, for example, no matter how many things you put and say, Bitcoin is quasi illegal, and if you don't report any Bitcoin holdings, you will be thrown in jail, people are still buying Bitcoin. People are still not reporting Bitcoin because that is the only way that they can to live, to transact. It is a necessity, right? So this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about a battle for necessity, and not just in the Bitcoin space, but also in other areas of our life. This is a big paradigm shift in more ways than one. So with that said, we hope that everybody continues to educate themselves on where things are going, prepare, plan, and actively discover what Bitcoin can do for you when it comes to wealth preservation. And with that, my name is Nick, signing off.
I'm Yuri. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.